There's a town where the children never cry, where their smiles are too perfect, their eyes too empty, and the silence between their footsteps, it's louder than any scream. When Claire Redden, a new teacher, tears one child's skin, not flesh, but fragile parchment, she uncovers a terrible secret. These children are not what they seem. And the town's dark ritual is only beginning. Claire isn't just fighting to save these paper-thin children. She's fighting to save herself from a story that wants to rewrite her very existence. Part 1. The Perfect Class. I took the job in Morrow Glen because I thought I needed quiet. No city noise, no endless emails, no shattered memories waiting in every reflection. Just a clean slate in a nowhere town. A single classroom school, tucked at the edge of the woods, the kind of place where time never quite learned how to run. The listing had been strange, vague, like it was written through fog. Seeking a quiet soul for a quiet place, it said. No photos, no application. Link, just a PO box and a time to arrive. I sent in my resume out of curiosity more than hope, but a week later, I had an offer. No interview, just a letter. Welcome to Morrow Glen. We've been waiting. The drive there was wrong in ways I can't quite explain. Roads that looped where they shouldn't. Trees that looked identical no matter how far I went. By the time I reached the town, I realized I hadn't seen another car for over an hour. And the air, it didn't move, not even a breeze. The schoolhouse stood like a wax model of itself. 2 stories, white paint, too fresh. A bell that didn't ring, even though it looked new. And a man standing outside who didn't seem to blink. Principal Harrow introduced himself in a voice that felt scraped from somewhere old. You're punctual, he said, and smiled without his eyes. They'll appreciate that. He didn't explain who they were, but I would learn. God help me, I would learn. My class was perfect. Too perfect. 15 children seated in neat rows, uniform posture, identical expressions. They didn't whisper, didn't squirm, didn't act like children. When I asked them to introduce themselves, they stood, one by one, and recited their names with voices that sounded memorized. Wren, Elric, Jonah, Dovey, Marlene. Names that tasted like dust in my mouth. I smiled, trying to ease the mood. They didn't smile back. When it came time to pass out worksheets, I noticed something strange. Every single child wrote with the same handwriting. Not similar, identical. Same curve of the S, same pressure on the pencil, same spacing between letters. I collected their papers after class, laid them out on my desk, and stared. The same page, 15 times, as if it had been photocopied, except it wasn't. The edges were slightly different. Faint pencil smudges unique to each. They had written them, but it was the same hand. I tried to convince myself it was nothing, that I was overthinking it, that I was just still shaken from everything back home. But the next day, it got worse. They knew what I was going to say before I said it. When I opened my mouth to ask a question, they wrote the answer. I gave them an assignment I hadn't planned yet, just to test them. And still, they handed it in finished within minutes. At recess, they stood on the grass in silence, not playing, not speaking, just standing. All of them facing the same direction, toward the woods. I asked one of them, Jonah, what they were looking at. He turned his head slowly. His voice was soft. We listened for the folds. I didn't ask what that meant. I just nodded and walked away. It was safer not to know. On the 3rd day, it happened. It was the end of class, and Jonah was helping me tidy up. He dropped his notebook, and I bent down to pick it up for him. When I stood, my nail caught the skin of his forearm. Just a scratch, barely anything. But the skin didn't bleed. It tore, and underneath was paper, not skin-colored, not makeup, not some trick. Parchment. Faded and soft, with folds like origami. Tucked inside were symbols, inked in black that shimmered, green in the light. I leaned closer. The letters weren't in any language I knew. They weren't still. They writhed, just slightly, like they were alive. I looked up at Jonah, expecting a scream or a cry of pain, but he just stared at me. Blank, calm. And then he said, in a voice that sounded too old to come from a child, that was not meant to open. I left the schoolhouse shaking. The sky outside had turned grey, though it wasn't cloudy. The wind had stopped entirely. It was too quiet, the kind of quiet that presses against your ears. I walked home, my heart pounding like I was being followed, but when I looked behind me, there was no one. Just the empty street, and a single sheet of paper drifting on the windless air. It landed at my feet. A page from a book, hand-torn at the edges. One word was scrawled across it. Unfold. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Jonah's arm, the parchment beneath it, the moving ink, and his voice echoing in the dark like a warning carved into bone. The next morning, I went to the town's library. It looked abandoned. Windows too dark. Door rusted shut. But when I knocked, it opened, slow and reluctant, like it hadn't moved in years. Inside was the smell of mildew and something sweeter, like old flowers and old death. An old woman sat behind the counter, reading a book with no title. I asked her about the school, about the children. She looked up slowly. Her eyes were the color of smoke. "You're the new teacher," she said. I nodded. "You found their skin." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. She closed her book, leaned forward, and whispered something I still hear in my sleep. "God help you. That's not how you unmake them." I asked her what that meant. She didn't explain. She just handed me a book from beneath the counter. It was bound in something dry and cracked. Leather, I think. But not quite. No title. No author. When I opened it, the words inside twisted on the page, like they were trying to avoid my eyes. I asked what it was. She said only this: "It's the reason they walk." And then she smiled, with teeth far too white for someone who should have been. Dead years ago, that night I dreamed of parchment, of children unfolding like paper cranes, of my hands soaked in ink, of a voice whispering from inside my lungs, telling me I was already part of the story, that I'd been written in. And when I woke up, my name was missing from my own journal, like someone had erased it, folded it away. Part 2. The Binding of the Ink Soul. I didn't open the book for 3 days. I kept it hidden under my bed, wrapped in the scratchy wool of the town-issued welcome blanket. Even through the layers, I could feel the hum of it, like a low, fevered breath pressed to my ribs. Some part of me believed that the longer I left it unopened, the less real this nightmare would be. But reality doesn't fade just because we close our eyes. By the 4th night, I couldn't stand it anymore. I lit every candle I had, laid the book flat on the desk, and opened to the first page. There were no chapters, no table of contents, just text, cramped, curling, and impossibly old. The ink wasn't black. It was something darker, a shade that shimmered between green and violet, like bruised moss. The title came first, scrawled across the parchment like it had been carved with urgency. The Binding of the Ink Soul, and beneath that, a warning. Speak no name but the true, bleed no ink but your own, fold no soul twice. I didn't understand what any of it meant, but I kept reading. The story was told in fragments, not a narrative, but a confession. In the year 1842, Morrow Glen was swallowed by death. A sickness moved through the valley like smoke. Children fell first, then the parents, and when the wind stopped, only the elders remained, the town's oldest blood. brittle and mourning. They buried the children in the woods. Too many to mark, too many to remember by name. And when their grief curdled into madness, they turned to the last thing they had left: words. The elders were scholars once, priests of a faith no one remembered. They had books, and books they believed could create. They found rituals in the margins, half-forgotten prayers to a god that required no name, only silence and sacrifice. And they crafted new children from parchment soaked in salt water and ash, binding them together with folded skin and careful handwriting. Each child was written into being, an ink soul, script given breath. The ritual was called imprimatur, the divine permission. But the permission, it seemed, had limits, because even paper can rot. I turned the page and saw drawings, diagrams of the human form reduced to symbols, not anatomy, but architecture, lines of folding instructions, glyphs stitched through joints, and at the center of each was a word written in a language I didn't recognize, but I felt it. Somehow I felt it in my bones, a sound not spoken, but remembered. The next section described the process of animation, not electricity, not machines, but ink bound with breath. The elders had inked their children with words scraped from tombs, forgotten names, prayers of hunger, symbols that twisted when stared at too long. And once the last stroke was written, the children opened their eyes. The book warned that the binding would not hold forever, that ink dries, that parchment remembers the body it once held, that one day the children would wake up. I felt the room shift around me as I read. The candlelight bent toward the book, like gravity had been rewritten. My breath fogged the air, even though the room wasn't cold. And then I noticed the text was changing. Not metaphorically, literally. The ink on the page was moving, letters twisting, sentences unfurling like they were stretching after centuries of sleep. New words wrote themselves in a language I didn't know, not English, not Latin, and slowly they began to translate, letter by letter, into something I could read. We never asked for names. We never asked to be made. We will unwrite ourselves. I slammed the book shut. It pulsed once beneath my hand. Warm, almost alive. I backed away, sat on the floor, shaking. My fingers were stained with ink, even though I hadn't touched the page directly. And that's when I heard it. Rustling, not leaves, not wind, paper, coming from the hallway outside my door. I stood, crept toward the sound, and opened the door just a crack. The hall was empty. Still, but something had been there. A single footprint was pressed into the rug outside my apartment. Not muddy, not bloody, inked. A perfect child-sized footprint made entirely of black, swirling letters. And beside it, a folded paper crane. Its wings unfurled when I reached for it. Inside was a phrase I didn't understand. No more bindings, no more folds. The next day at school, the children were different, still silent, still, but not passive. They watched me now, tracked my every move, heads turning in eerie unison. And when I asked a question, they didn't answer in speech or writing. They just stared, as if waiting for me to remember something I hadn't learned yet. At recess, I noticed something else. Jonah, the boy whose skin I'd torn. He wasn't there. His desk sat empty. I asked Principal Harrow where he was. He didn't blink. "There is no Jonah," he said. But I remembered him. I remembered the scratch, the parchment, the ink shifting beneath his flesh. "There was," I whispered. "There is not," Harrow said. And then he smiled. Some folds are never meant to be opened. That night, I returned to the book. I didn't want to, but I had to understand, because something was coming undone in Morrow Glen, and I was becoming part of it. The book's last section was titled The Covenant of Quiet. It warned that if the children awoke fully, they would begin to write, on their own, no longer passive, no longer bound by the words given to them. They would speak new prayers, write new rules, and once they began to write, they would begin to overwrite. First themselves, then the town, then us. The final line was handwritten, not printed like the others. Do not let them find their names, for a name is a soul, and a soul can burn. I closed the book. In the dark, I could feel it again. The hum of folded paper beneath skin, not just in the school, not just in the children, but in me. I washed my hands in boiling water, trying to scrub the ink away. But even as I scraped and cried and whispered prayers I didn't believe in, I saw it, letters blooming across my forearm, not tattoos, not bruises. Writing, as if something had begun to author me. And I remembered Jonah's words. That was not meant to open. Now I wonder, was it the book that changed the children, or did the book only reflect what had already begun? Because the words aren't just on paper anymore. They're in the walls, in the trees, in my voice. Even now, as I speak this aloud, I feel them watching, listening, waiting. Part 3, Whispers Beneath the Skin. The voices began on a Monday. I'd barely slept the night before. The ink on my arms had faded, but I could still feel it, humming beneath the skin like a second pulse. I arrived at the school early, hoping the silence of the empty classroom might calm me, but it wasn't empty. There were whispers in the walls. At first, I thought it was the old building settling, creaking floorboards, groaning pipes, wind slipping through cracks in the window panes. But the school has no central heating, and no wind had touched Morrow Glen since I'd arrived. The sound wasn't structural. It was language, muffled syllables, foreign words slithering behind the plaster, always just beyond recognition, like something was speaking with lips that had forgotten how to form human sounds. When I pressed my ear to the chalkboard, I heard it clearly. Claire. A dozen voices, all whispering my name, some urgent, some mournful, as if they weren't just calling me, but remembering me. I stumbled back, heart hammering, ears ringing, and that's when the children arrived. No one walked through the front door. I didn't hear footsteps in the hall. They were simply there, at their desks. 15 perfect little bodies, eyes fixed on me, smiling, identical. I tried to speak, but my voice caught. Before I could say anything, Wren, the girl in the front row, stood and said, without hesitation, "Good morning, Miss Redden. The voices know your name now." Every other child at the exact same moment whispered, "They wrote it down last night." I didn't respond. Couldn't. I walked to my desk, pretending everything was fine, as if pretending still mattered. As I sat, Marlene raised her hand. "Yes?" I said, my voice cracking. She smiled, a slow, unnatural thing. "You're wondering how much they know. The answer is enough." I blinked. "What?" Dovey turned around from the row in front of her. "They finish your dreams now," Elric added. "They're learning your fear by sound." And Wren, smiling still. "Your mother's name was Eleanor. She died in winter. You said goodbye too late." I stood so quickly I knocked over my chair. "How do you—" All 15 children spoke in unison. "You're being written." I ran out of the classroom, into the hallway, but the whispering followed. I could hear it now without pressing my ear to the wall. Names, memories, pages turning. It wasn't just inside the walls, it was inside me. I made it to the teacher's lounge, if you can call a windowless room, with a single chair and a dusty coffee pot, a lounge. I locked the door behind me, breathing hard, trying to ground myself in something real. That's when I noticed my reflection in the microwave's metal surface. There was ink behind my eyes. Just for a moment, a flicker, but I saw it, the shimmer, the symbols, curling in the whites of my eyes like roots spreading in soil. That night, I didn't go home. I stayed in the school library, not the town's, but the small one tucked beside the classroom. It hadn't been used in years. Dust coated every shelf. The air tasted like forgotten time. But there was a book I needed to find, not The Binding of the Inksole. I'd hidden that one, fearing what it might do if left unchecked. I was looking for something older, something the librarian had hinted at when she muttered about the first fold. I found it near the back, bound in rotting cloth. No title, no date. Just a single symbol on the cover, a circle, split by a jagged line down the center. Inside were records, names, lists of the town's residents. And there, scribbled in tight, frantic ink beneath a page marked Teachers, 1921. Present was a name scratched out again and again. Underneath the ink, barely legible, was one word, Adele. The name meant nothing to me until I flipped the page and saw her picture. A school, portrait, grainy, black and white. A young woman, brown eyes, sharp jaw, hair parted in the middle, just like mine. Same height, same build. Not similar, identical, except her eyes looked scared, like she knew she didn't belong in the frame. There was a note beside her name, transferred, never arrived. But someone had written a second note beneath it, folded, not gone. And below that, smaller still, she was written out. I didn't sleep again. How could I? Every shadow twisted like a page turning. Every creak in the floor sounded like a whisper rehearsing my name. By morning, I felt brittle, paper thin. I returned to class, hoping, stupidly, for normalcy. But the children were waiting, standing this time, not seated. Each held a folded page in their hands. Without speaking, they stepped forward and laid them on my desk. One by one, 15 pages, 15 bodies, 15 stories. I opened the first, my handwriting, my thoughts, an exact record of what I had done the night before. The second page, the dream I'd had when I fell asleep for 5 minutes in the library chair. The third, a conversation I hadn't had yet, a prediction. I reached the 7th page and froze. It wasn't just about me. It was me. Inside that page, drawn in charcoal and ink, was an anatomical sketch of a body opened at the chest. Inside, folded parchment where lungs should be. Symbols stitched into place with thread made of hair and scrawled in red across the center of the chest. Claire Redden, 3-4, written. I dropped the page, stepped back, and then I saw it. Jonah, standing in the doorway, his skin whole, his eyes empty. He opened his shirt slowly. No blood, no pain, just a single slit down the center of his chest. Inside, folds. He reached in and pulled out a page. He handed it to me without a word. It was damp, warm, and at the top, in that same bruised ink. Chapter 9, where she replaces the lost. My name was written 7 times in the margins, some crossed out, some underlined, and one written over another name, Adele. I dropped the page and ran again, not out of the school this time, but down. There's a basement below the library. I'd seen the door once, half covered by a shelf. I kicked it open and descended the crumbling stairs. The air was thick, sweet and wrong, and at the bottom I found shelves, lined not with books, but with bodies, wrapped in parchment, bound with thread, eyes open, mouths sealed with wax. Each one bore a label: teacher, postmaster, reverend, mayor, and at the far end of the room, a single figure stood, still breathing, still warm, eyes wide with trapped awareness. A woman with my face, flesh, half peeled, revealing ink and script beneath, mouth moving, silently mouthing the same word again and again. Unwrite, unwrite, unwrite. I backed away, fell, crawled up the stairs like the ground itself wanted to keep me. When I reached the top, the school was silent. Too silent. The children were gone. No desks, no chalkboard, just paper, everywhere, floating in the air like ash. Some of the pages carried my name, some carried hers. All of them whispered the same phrase as they brushed past my skin. A name is a soul, and yours is almost gone. Part 4. The teacher before me. The classroom was cold that morning, colder than it had any right to be. I hadn't taught in 3 days. I'd barely eaten, barely spoken. Each hour felt stretched thin, like the time in Morrow Glen was trying to snap under its own weight. I returned because I needed answers, because I couldn't stop thinking about the girl in the basement, the girl with my face, and because something was missing. Someone. I started pulling at the paneling behind the chalkboard. I don't know what made me do it. Some instinct, a flicker of movement, a sliver of cold air slipping through the seams. It groaned as I pried it loose. Nails screeched like they didn't want to come out. Behind it, a narrow cavity, dark, dust-choked, and full of someone's life. There was a leather bag, sun-faded and soft with age, a stack of notebooks wrapped in twine, a pair of round glasses, one lens cracked, the other fogged over. The bag had a name stitched into the side in faint silver thread. Halloway, the previous teacher, the one no one in town ever spoke of. I pulled everything into the light, brushing away cobwebs. Inside the notebooks were lesson plans, but they weren't right. The handwriting was rigid, terrified. Words repeated too many times. In the margins, scrawled notes, frantic corrections. Do not touch Jonah. Wren knows more than she says. Marlene doesn't blink anymore. They're repeating me. And then, on the back of the final plan, a class photo. Smiling children. Wooden desks. Chalkboard behind them. It looked just like my own class, but one child had been scratched out. Not scribbled, not erased, violently carved away. The paper torn where their face had been. Their name was missing from the list beneath. A blank space, as if whoever they were had been swallowed whole. Then I found the diary. Its cover was scorched at the edges, like it had been yanked from a fire just in time. The first few pages were hopeful, naive. Ms. Halloway described arriving in Morrow Glen, how the children were perfect little angels, how the town was a bit odd but charming in its quiet way. But that optimism rotted fast. Something is wrong with their hands. Every child writes identically, not just similar, identical, as though one hand moves them all. They don't eat, I've watched. Lunch disappears, but I never see mouths open. There's chanting in the woods. I hear it when I leave school late. The same cadence, over and over, like paper folding itself. Then, I saw Elric unfold, his fingers. Not open, unfold. There was no bone, just creases, hollow seams. Inside, something writhed. I kept reading. Her writing became shaky, erratic. Some pages were nothing but scribbles and ink blots, as though her thoughts were slipping off the page before she could trap them. They dream with their eyes open. They speak thoughts I haven't had yet. I think they see me before I enter a room. One of them, Wren, I think, asked if I liked my skin. She said it looked easy to peel. I'm leaving. I should have left days ago, weeks, but I think they won't let me. The last page was different, partially torn, stained. The ink still smudged at the edges. They want to be more than paper. They want to feel, to taste, to remember, but the fold won't hold. They need something to anchor them. They need, and then it stops, mid-sentence. The last line begins in shaking ink. I think they chose nothing else, no signature, no end, just a drop of blood where the pen tip tore the page. I was still holding the diary when the knock came, soft, measured. 3. Slow raps. I froze. A second knock, faster, harder. Then silence. I stood, moved toward the door, peered through the small window. The children were there, all of them, standing in the fog, still, smiling, watching. But they weren't alone. Behind them, half lost in the grey mist, were others. Dozens, too tall to be children, too still to be alive. Some wore the uniforms of past decades. Some had no faces, just paper masks folded where skin should be. One wore a black shawl, a wide-brimmed hat, a teacher's pin glinting on the collar. Her hands were wrapped in parchment. Her skin stained with ink. She looked just like the photograph. Miss Halloway. But her eyes were empty, like something had been written over her. I backed away from the door, locked it, bolted it, turned off the lights. The whispers returned immediately, sliding under the door like smoke, curling up the walls, filling the classroom with the sound of my own name, over and over. Claire, Claire, Claire. I turned toward the desk, desperate for something real, something solid, and saw the class photo again. Only now, there were two faces scratched out. The blank space beside Jonah, and me. My name too had been scraped from the list below. Not with a pen, with fingernails. Then, from the floor beneath the desk, movement. A paper slither, like something was unfolding itself upward. I leaned down and saw, sticking out from beneath the floorboards, the corner of a page. I tugged it free. It was warm and written on it, in the same frantic ink as the diary. If they choose you, if they start to write you, you must not let them finish the story. They only need a few final lines, and then you're theirs. My hands trembled, because on the back of the page was a single sentence. Tonight, Claire Redden invites them in, and beneath it, my own handwriting. Part 5. The Ceremony of Folding. I wasn't invited. No one told me there'd be a gathering. No letters, no town announcements. But I felt it all the same. The way the air thickened around midnight. The way the birds stopped singing at once. The way the ink in my books began to ripple, like it was listening. I followed the sound, barefoot across the brittle grass, past the library, beyond the school, toward the clearing at the centre of Morrow Glen. A circle of stones older than the town itself. They were all there. Every soul I'd seen since I arrived. Men in grey coats, hands trembling around scrolls. Women in shawls, lips moving in perfect rhythm. Even the butcher, even the mayor, all of them whispering the same phrases over and over. And in the centre, the children, standing still, eyes closed, not a breath, not a twitch, not a sound, like paper dolls waiting for scissors. The ritual began without signal. One voice rose above the rest, shrill, wavering. I recognized it. The librarian. She stood at the front, a scroll clutched in both hands, reading lines that didn't make sense in any human tongue. It sounded like wind through folded pages, like someone humming through torn parchment. And as she read, the townspeople repeated her, eyes glazed, bodies swaying like reeds in a quiet tide. The children didn't move until the first one did. Wren. She opened her eyes, and they were bleeding ink. Black trails down her cheeks, lips sewn shut with thin white thread. Then she bent, at the waist, at the knees, at the shoulders. She folded once, twice, 3 times, and collapsed into a perfect square. Paper, blank on one side, covered in symbols on the other. No scream, no resistance, just folded away. One by one, they followed. Marlene, Elric, Sylvie, the twins. Each step was precise, rehearsed. Each motion sharper than the last. They were being put away, filed, and then Jonah. He stood in the middle, frozen. The townspeople kept chanting. The librarian looked up from her scroll. "Fold," she said. "Only that. Fold." But Jonah didn't move. He turned, slowly, looked at me, saw me watching, and ran. He broke the circle. Screams erupted. Scrolls fell to the ground like wounded birds. Jonah ran straight for the trees, toward me. His feet kicked up dust, his mouth wide with a scream that didn't carry. He reached me breathless, shaking. "Hide me," he whispered. "Please, please hide me." I pulled him behind the nearest tree, crouched low, shielded him with my body. His skin was warm, too warm. And when I touched his arm, he gasped. "It burns," he whispered. "The parchment. It's burning." I looked, pulled up his sleeve. Where there should have been flesh, there was parchment, scorched and cracking. Ink ran along the seams of his fingers. Symbols I didn't recognize were crawling up his neck like veins. "I remember," he said. Before. What?" I asked. He shook his head. Tears fell, but they weren't tears. They were tiny flecks of ash. "I had a sister. We played by the river. My name wasn't Jonah then. I was..." He stopped, wiped at his face. "No, I'm not supposed to say it. They'll hear. They wrote it out of me." He gripped my wrist. "They need someone new," he said. "Every year, when one of us burns, when we can't hold the fold anymore, they need a fresh name, a real soul." I pulled back. "What do you mean?" His voice cracked. "They picked you." Behind us, the ritual broke apart. People were shouting. The librarian's voice shrieked Jonah's name. The sound echoed wrong, like it had too many syllables. I peered back toward the clearing. The folded children were being collected, gently, lovingly, slipped into dark wooden boxes like sacred scrolls, but not Jonah. They were looking for him now, fanning out into the woods, lanterns swinging, calling him with mouths that no longer looked like mouths. He clutched at me again. "You don't understand," he whispered. "They can't. Write me again. I remember too much. I remember being real." I opened my mouth to speak, and a sound came out that wasn't mine. A whisper. Dry. Fragile. A phrase I didn't understand, but my tongue knew. Jonah flinched. "They've already started," he said. "The story's writing itself." He backed, away from me, his eyes full of something ancient, something beyond fear. "You have to choose," he said. "You can help me, or you can take my place." And then he ran. I didn't chase him. Couldn't. My legs wouldn't move. My throat was tight. And inside my mouth, I could taste paper. Dry. Dusty. Sacred. I looked down at my hands. They were shaking, but not from fear, from something else. I opened. My palm, there, resting in the crease, a single strip of parchment. My name was written on it, in my handwriting, but not from any pen I'd held. Beneath it, a line had begun to form, a new sentence. Still incomplete, waiting for me to finish it. And from the woods behind me, they were coming. The townspeople, the children, all folding, all unfolding. Their voices blending into one, like a book closing over a final page. I ran, but even as I did, I felt the words catching up, writing themselves across my spine, line by line. Part 6. The Unwritten. I stood at the edge of the clearing, heart hammering so loudly I was sure the children could hear it, even beneath their quiet rustling. Their bodies moved with that unnatural crispness, as if the sound of dry leaves brushing against one another followed every step. The rustle grew louder, circling around me like a whispering wind that promised both salvation and doom. In my hands, I held the book, the forbidden final chapter of the binding of the ink soul. Its pages, fragile as moth wings, trembled under my fingers. The words inside were alive. They shifted and pulsed, ink bleeding into new shapes as if the book was breathing, waiting for me to finish a story that had been started long ago but never completed. I could run. I could flee this cursed town. Let the cycle go on without me. Let the paper children continue to be folded away, to be replaced again and again. But that meant letting their nightmare stretch into eternity. The thought of those perfect, silent faces, locked in their endless torment, made my blood run cold. The book had another promise, a ritual to unmake them, to tear apart the binding that held them together, to release their souls, if they had any left, from the brittle prison of parchment and prayer. But it came with a price. The final words. A line written for me to speak aloud, a sentence that, once spoken, would erase me from the town's memory, from existence itself, and perhaps, in that erasure, the children would finally be free. I took a trembling breath and opened the book to the last page. The writing was small, jagged, like it had been carved in a desperate hand. "Speak these words," it said. "Break the bindings, shatter the ink, and free what remains." The children's rustling grew closer, a slow circle tightening around me. I felt their cold eyes on my skin, their impossible silence screaming in my ears. I began to read. By torn page and broken spine, unbind the souls in bloodline twine. Ink and flesh, no more confine. From script to dust, release, resign. My voice cracked, carried by the heavy night air. The children froze. Then a shiver passed through them, like a sudden breeze through brittle leaves. But as I spoke, the ink inside me shifted. It moved under my skin, alive and watching. My own flesh felt like paper thinning, my veins rivers of black script. Panic surged through me. The words weren't just unbinding the children, they were unbinding me, because I wasn't real. The revelation hit me like a cold wave. I was never real. I was the last replacement, a character written in ink, summoned to play my part in this endless story. The previous teachers, lost, erased, rewritten, were all ghosts in this town's twisted narrative. They didn't die. They just ceased to exist in the eyes of Morrow Glen. I was the ink soul's final act. The ritual wasn't a way to free the children. It was how they bound the next teacher, how the cycle continued. The realization hollowed me out. The rustling grew louder, the children moving closer still. Their eyes, empty pages, searched mine. "Finish it," they seemed to whisper. "Become the story." My hands trembled, the book now a burning weight. Could I stop? Could I fight what I was becoming? There was no choice. The script was writing itself across my arms, my neck, my face. Names, dates, prayers, binding me tighter than chains. I looked at the children, their paper-thin faces almost pleading, not for salvation, but for continuation. They were trapped between worlds, neither alive nor dead, neither human nor story. And now, so was I. I raised my voice again. By ink's embrace, by paper's tear, let the story end, if you dare. From whispered script to silent air, I give myself to break the snare. The clearing fell deathly silent. Then, as if the night itself exhaled, the children began to fold. But this time, their forms shimmered and blurred, not disappearing into boxes or shadows, but unraveling. Their edges frayed, words dissolving into the wind. They were vanishing. I felt the ritual's power surge through me, the burning in my skin reaching a fever pitch. And then, the book snapped shut in my hands. Darkness swallowed the clearing. When I opened my eyes, the children were gone. The town was empty, silent, too quiet. But I was still here. Or was I? Because even as the last words left my lips, a new page unfolded beneath my fingers. Fresh, blank, waiting. And on it, written in a steady hand, Claire Redden, The teacher. A new chapter beginning. The story never ends. Outside, the wind whispered through Morrow Glen, and I knew I was already becoming the ink. If you think Claire's story is over, think again. Morrow Glen's secrets run deeper, and the next chapter might be darker than you can imagine. If you want to uncover more chilling tales like this, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Every click helps keep the whispers alive and brings you closer to the next shadow waiting just beyond the page. Stay curious and stay afraid.